Hello world, and welcome to this week's episode of Doing Depression. Yeah, we got a sound effect this week. I also feel like I really smacked you in the face with the hello last time, and that was not my intention. So I tried to be a little more calm, a little more chill this time, and I hope it was better. Anyway, today I wanted to talk about self-compassion and how important it's been in my recovery process. I would say self-compassion is probably the single most effective modality, concept that I've tried for my mental health. It's been the best idea that I've put energy into and seen positive results and lasting results. And I really only read like the first couple chapters of Kristin Neff's book. I do that with a lot of self-help books, but it just goes to show that they can still be really helpful, even if you only read the first part. Kristin Neff is like the name in self-compassion. She's been doing research on it since like the 90s or the early 2000s. And when I say research, I mean randomized controlled trials of different ways people treat themselves and measuring physiological changes in the body. And the people who are using self-compassion are showing decreased cortisol, decreased adrenaline, increase in oxytocin, otherwise known as the cuddle hormone, and they often report feeling better too. Like, she has the evidence to show that being kind to ourselves improves our health. And I know when people start getting into self-compassion talk, it sounds weird, it sounds wacky, it sounds wooey. What do you mean I'm just supposed to sit here with my hands on my chest saying nice things to myself when it feels like my life is falling apart around me? Like, that's not going to fix it. Except that it does. The research says it does. I looked up a 2013 study that I just found on Google about self-compassion and body dissatisfaction in women. And they had a self-compassion group do a 3-week meditation class, and they had almost a 20% reduction in body dissatisfaction as opposed to the weight control group, which only had a 5% decrease. Now, I don't know what the weight control group was, but I looked at the study and it didn't look like they talked about it much. But I'm assuming it was a group dedicated to helping people either maintain their current weight or lose weight. So something that's meant to physically affect or change the body. The wild thing about the self-compassion group is that they didn't do anything to focus on changing their bodies, just the way their brains thought about their bodies. And they had a much higher success rate, and they were still experiencing those positive changes even weeks after the study ended. Like, I know this sounds incredulous, but seriously, look up some studies. The research backs it up, and it's really cool. To prepare for this, I did go back over the first part of her book, as well as watch her TED Talk on self-compassion from 2013. And her book is a little bit more shame-based in the sense that she's talking about how that approach isn't as effective. She spends a lot of time talking about how society pushes a shame-based model and how that's like the norm that most people grow up with. And deviating from that to do self-compassion instead sounds ridiculous because the belief is that if we're nice to ourselves, we'll just end up being lazy without the motivation to do anything. But the research shows the exact opposite. Criticizing ourselves robs us of our motivation because it activates our nervous system like we're being threatened. So we go into fight, flight, freeze. Or I've also heard the argument for fun, make it 4 Fs. Because not everybody fights or runs away. Some people just stand there and don't do anything. I would be one of those people. Could you imagine making a decision that consequential? I mean, we make the wrong choice here and we're dead, right? That's going to take some serious pondering. And we don't get time to ponder when the lion's about to jump. So anyway, self-criticism activates the 4 Fs: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or survival mode, flooding the nervous system with stress signals, and our bodies release adrenaline and cortisol, both things that will increase our risk of a heart attack or a stroke. So it takes a toll on our physical health, especially when it's happening a lot. And when someone is both the critic and the critiqued, they're in a never-ending cycle of feeling attacked again and again. Eventually, this turns into depression as people dissociate from the stress and their bodies and their lives. This is not a place to get motivation from. Why would I want to address any of the problems when it means feeling overwhelmed for what feels like forever? No one who has detached themselves from that is willingly going to go back into it. Like, that's just not happening. So then they stay stuck in this cycle of criticize, avoid, until they're avoiding everything in every aspect of their lives. And I would say millions of people are living like this. I lived like this, stuck in survival mode, just trying to get to the next thing. Not necessarily focusing on what went wrong in the past or how to make it better in the future, but just dealing with whatever is right in front of me as quickly and as smoothly as possible so I can go back to zoning out and dissociating and just not giving a shit about what's happening around me. Like a dirty apartment or, some health appointment I need to make. I don't have the capacity to do any of that. It's just the minimum of whatever is absolutely necessary and then nothing else. And it's robbed me of a lot of my life living like that. And as much as I want to crack the whip and snap myself out of it by screaming, "What is wrong with you?" I know I would be better off saying, "That sounds really hard. I hear you saying you're under a lot of pressure, and I understand why you'd want to take a break from that. That's okay." But anyway, that's the theories and kind of reasoning behind how self compassion work. In her TED Talk, she pretty explicitly lays out the three components of self compassion as well, so I'm going to go over those. The first one is self kindness, meeting ourselves with understanding and compassion rather than judgment and criticism. Definitely easier said than done. The second one is common humanity, so asking how are we the same rather than how are we different? What is the shared human experience? Acknowledging the imperfection rather than getting caught up on how things aren't perfect, because most people's lives aren't perfect. That's much more relatable. That's what's going to connect us to other people. And then the third one is mindfulness, everybody's favorite, right? If we don't notice what's going on in the moments when we're suffering, then we can't figure out what's causing it. Most people are so blended with their inner critics that they don't realize the thing that's making them miserable is the voice in their own head. So boom, 3 easy steps and eternal happiness could be yours, right? If only. Let's take a more practical approach. What does self-compassion look like? How do we actually be nice to ourselves? I've got this example. This is from before I even knew about self-compassion, but it's pretty simple and I think it illustrates the point really well. When I graduated from college, I was really depressed because I couldn't get a job despite going on so many interviews. So many interviews. It was ridiculous. I couldn't get into grad school. I was back in my childhood bedroom, and I was just really down on myself. Every day I woke up and the first thing I would do was look at my phone and go, "I'm just now getting out of bed and it's already the afternoon. Ugh." And I would be so miserable that I slept so late and tell myself I needed to work harder at going to bed earlier and not endlessly watching YouTube videos or whatever it was I was doing. And eventually I noticed this inner monologue was not a good way to start my day. So I sat down to fix it and I was like, what do I say instead? And I thought about saying something like, "Oh, I'm so grateful to start my day." But that wasn't true because this was when I had intense SI in the mornings, and the last thing I wanted to do was start my day or be grateful that I had a day of life in front of me. So I was like, it has to be something true, something simple, something that doesn't have the positive psychology vibes on it. And I remember just replaying what I was already saying over and over. I'm getting out of bed and it's already the afternoon. And I was like, what if I just dropped the second part? It's not, "I'm getting out of bed afternoon." It's, "I'm getting out of bed." I liked that it was neutral. It wasn't like, "I'm getting out of bed. Yippee! Gold star for me." It was, "I'm getting out of bed. Stop. Period." I'm not judging this. It is what it is. I'm getting out of bed. And that's the important part. I think pretty quickly after that change, I was able to see that getting out of bed was a win. And acknowledging it with my neutral statement was kind of like a little celebration. I think there was other criticism about what kind of person celebrates getting out of bed and has no other accomplishments for the day. How could I have wasted so much time not being productive? But hey, at least now I was starting my day with a small win, instead of the crushing pressure of misery and judgment. So I'll take it. And just that little change in my language made it so that it was so much easier to do other things. Eventually, I was getting out of bed and going for a walk, and then I started to look forward to going on walks, and I would plan waking up around them. And then I had some structure and stability to my day, and it just made a huge difference in my life, all from just stopping myself from judging myself. So yeah, it works, even if we're only able to focus on one part of one problem. It can be life-changing. There is one last self-compassion story I want to share. Well, I have so many stories. I'm definitely going to need to do a part 2 on this eventually. Because I didn't even tell y'all about the self-compassion class I took, and that was a whole thing. But I just can't talk about self-compassion without telling this story because it involves my cat, and he's amazing. So whenever I talk about self-compassion, I always say I learned it from my cat, because that's where my self-compassion journey really started. He's the one who helped me notice and be more consistent and kept me kind of accountable through it. So I had just gotten out of residential treatment and gone back to my apartment, and literally the next day I got this cat. I got there, slept the night, and then went to the shelter the next day, and he came home with me. And it was only a few weeks later, I was standing in front of my bathroom mirror, skin picking for who knows how long, because if you know, that's how it goes. And side note, skin picking is a very common coping skill that nobody ever talks about because it's so highly stigmatized for being gross or disgusting. But it shouldn't be because literally so many people do it. Like, I'm not going to say everybody, but so many people. Like, you are not alone. Anyway, as I was standing there doing who knows what to my face, I can hear my cat wandering around my apartment, screaming, which isn't really abnormal for him because he does this like echolocation thing to explore new spaces. So I ignored him and kept doing what I was doing. And then he comes into the bathroom, still screaming, and it's pretty loud. But I just keep ignoring him because, I'm pretty busy here. And then he starts rubbing on my legs, and I'm like, "Aw, that's cute. I'll reach down and pet him soon." But I don't. And then you know what he does? He bites me. Hard. I don't remember if he drew blood that time, but there are definitely times he did. He was not happy. He was like, "You're going to pay attention to me whether you want to or not, damn it." And then, and only then, did I stop and think, what does my cat want? And I ran through the list. Affection? No, I pet him for a bit, but he won't let me go back to what I was doing. Food? He ate a little, but not much. Litter box? That wasn't a lot, but I'll scoop it anyway. And I just ran through all the things it could be until I figured out what it was. He probably just wanted me to play with him because he really needs a lot to keep him entertained. But this was the start of me practicing self-compassion. Yes, it was on someone else, but this was the first time I really tuned in to identifying a need and then taking steps to meet it. Previously, I had no idea how to go about figuring out what I needed. It took my cat walking in and screaming at me that he needed something and biting me before I started listening, before I started noticing. And then when I did start noticing, the communication made sense. When my cat starts screaming, it means he needs something. When I choose to ignore him and he comes into the bathroom and starts rubbing on my legs, that's him telling me he still really needs the thing. And if I continue to ignore him from there, he has no choice but to escalate his communication to violence, because that's the only effective way of getting his need met. It took going through this cycle with my cat multiple times before I realized I had been doing this to myself my whole life. I had been ignoring my needs and ignoring myself asking until I couldn't take it anymore and I'd have a breakdown. Trying to be a better cat parent taught me how to take care of myself better. If my cat has needs that he doesn't quite know how to communicate, but that he still needs help with, I probably do too. And at this point, I was really early on in my eating disorder recovery, so I had to take breaks during my day to ask myself, am I thirsty? Am I hungry? Do I have to go to the bathroom? Am I tired? Do I need to take a nap? Right? Like, I had to start so entry level with taking care of myself, really going back to the basics, because those were the needs I was ignoring and not meeting. And just like my relationship with my cat improved when I started meeting his needs on the first ask, when I heard him screaming around my apartment instead of waiting for him to bite me, it got easier to meet my needs the more I practiced listening. Because the more I practiced, the sooner I started noticing when I was asking for a need to be met. And then I would be less distressed or angry about having to stop whatever I was doing to go take care of myself. It was more easeful. That's what the woman I took a self-compassion class with would always say. Self-compassion is asking, how can I make this more easeful for myself? What kind of a word is easeful anyway? But more on that in another episode. I think this is where I'm going to leave it at for today. I hope you got something out of this. If you did, feel free to let me know. It's always nice to hear I'm not actually just sitting alone in a room talking to myself. Thank you for sharing this time and space with me, and I can't wait to get together and do it again next week.